Hey, so my name is Amy, and I'm going to be taking a look at Andrew Yang's chart today. I'm going to try and be quick about this, but I'm also going to try and approach it as though you don't know about astrology, so just in case this is a jumping off point for anyone. I know it's not science, I'm literally studying omens in the sky. But also, astrologers, Andrew Yang's chart is really interesting, so just like check it out and get excited with me. So this could be a little lengthy, but let's get into it. Okay, I'm using the tropical zodiac, whole sign houses, and traditional rulerships. We do have an accurate birth time for Andrew Yang. So he was born at 6:20 a.m. on January 13th, 1975. First, let's look at that moment when Andrew Yang was born. So when all these cycles were going on, when did he come into the picture? Having the sun just below the horizon puts it in what we call the first house. Not only does this make your sun sign and the rising sign the same, but it also adds some vitality to the body. So your outside presentation really contains and carries your core too. So wherever you go, there you are, you know? You can be seen, you can be known, people can get a sense of you.
You couldn't tell this just by looking at me, but I'm not that much of a poker player.
Exponential growth! Exponential! Actually, technically, it's still linear.
So we see Yang, Yang sees Yang. Also, the sun can see its ruler, Saturn, really directly, and that also adds to him knowing his own mind. Having the sun in the first house can also add some self-awareness to your body. So that's a good point in the direction of vitality. That's a good point in the direction of health. It's also self-awareness of how you're moving.
And he uses his hand gestures well. Very big gestures, we tend to follow those gestures with our eyes. Yeah.
Yang is very, kind of locks on. So
Right.
I guess when he does something, you pay more attention to it.
Right.
All right.
Because it's
now,
beautiful the way he does it. If you watch him, it's like choreographed.
The three important points that people look at in astrology, your sun, your moon, and your rising sign, they're all ruled by Saturn in Yang's chart. So he has a Capricorn sun, a Capricorn rising, and an Aquarius moon. Yang's Mercury and Venus are also in Aquarius, so there's just a lot of Saturn. So Saturn, it's the farthest planet that you can see with the naked eye, so it gets the significations of limits. And it moves in a very predictable orbit, and it's slow. It's slow compared to the other inner planets. And it's true, anyone with Capricorn placements, especially, if things aren't unfolding for you in a rapid way, that's so normal.
So as a 25-year-old with my PowerPoint deck, it's not like people were just like throwing money at me to start this company. I got rejected over and over and over again until I'd like run out of money and like moved out of my apartment. And so 6 months my company went out of business because no one cared about my little .com at that time. So I'm like 26. I've just lost investors like $250,000, which seemed like a ton of money at the time. I still owe $100,000 in law school debt. My parents at this point are like, "What the heck happened to you? like we thought you were like relatively bright."
Saturn really likes to test us through a couple different rounds of its cycle, which is a long and slow one, hence all the significations about time.
I feel like we all have these battle wounds or scars that, if you talk to someone who's been through it, you have a real shared commonality.
So hang in there, all you Saturn-ruled people. Someone with both sides of Saturn understands both inclusion, so looking at things from inside the system, as well as looking at it from above and outside, from an excluded kind of outsider perspective. So this is someone who makes a very effective institutional actor.
I think we need a combination of outsiders and insiders in the Yang administration to be maximally effective. And so that's the kind of team I would build. And I think one of the things that people appreciate about me is that I'm not tied to ideology, that as long as you share the vision and have the goals in mind and want to be part of the team, then we can work together.
So Capricorn is the cardinal Earth receptive sign of Saturn. So it's receptive to knowing the rules and the structures and the limits and the hierarchy and the right way and like the tradition. It's into obtaining status through doggedly respecting cause and effect, right? Through the inside of society's institutions or hierarchies or family structures. So in order to game a system, you'd have to actually know all the rules and be interested in seeing how they work and how you are actually supposed to win.
And then you game out how you can get meaningful solutions across the finish line in a reasonable time frame. Let's call it 5 to 10 years. and I'd run a successful national nonprofit, and I saw what we can and can't do at that scale. And we can pretend that it's still like, oh, as long as I work hard and play by the rules, everything is going to be fine. But one of the examples I use is, look, the robot truck doesn't care if you're a good, conscientious truck driver or a sloppy, terrible one. It's all the same. The technology doesn't care if you're a really diligent radiologist or like a not so diligent one. We can still just read the film better with software. So we have to try and evolve as quickly as possible. There's a lot to be done.
Now, Aquarius is the active outsider version of Saturn. It's fixed air. So air sits above, it looks down, it's got kind of the hawk's eye view of everything. So you definitely see outside the box thinking and futurist.
This is the vision of the economy that we have to make real as quickly as possible. Instead of being a pipe dream, it's actually inevitable. It's one reason why futurists like Elon Musk have endorsed me in my campaign.
My teacher, Austin Kopic, points out with Aquarius that it likes to invent new and better rules for everyone. It's not just complete wild abstract clouds. It's this very well-formed castle of ideas that you just add on to and add on to.
And then if we had different measurements aside from stock market prices and GDP, then we could take the best of capitalism and turn it towards things that we can all get excited about. So that's the vision of what I call human capitalism.
So if you only have Aquarius, you can get caught in the space between how stupid reality is and how good you see it could be functioning, right? So the space between is very frustrating. But with both Capricorn and Aquarius, you don't mind taking all the little steps to get to the big castle in the sky that you're envisioning.
Like showing up every day, just like pushing the ball forward inch by inch. And those things take years, typically.
So how is Saturn even doing in Yang's chart? Saturn by sign is not doing well. Saturn is in Cancer. So where Capricorn is very earth, material, matter, security, yes, but in the material realm. Cancer is the emotional side of security. So it's where the most precious emotional source waters live. The urge to protect in the Cancer realm is much more primordial and instinctual and irrational. If Saturn gets protective, Saturn gets cold and a little harsh and distant. This is mothers facing scarcity that's unfair. This is outsiders, especially children who are suffering neglect because of lack. In Yang's chart, Saturn is in the 7th. So in astrology, that gives you a little boost of dignity because you're in an angular house. And it's the house of partnerships and the other. So this means that he himself, with his vitality, centered in the first, is always looking across and always seeing Saturn in Cancer and what that means. So if he goes to a new city, he's going to see the vulnerable people on the streets that need protection. If he makes more funds, which is what his second house is all about, then he's going to see the way that structures don't universally support other people in doing that. He's going to notice the ways that laws don't protect what's vulnerable in people, their emotional well-being. So every time he experiences success or wants funding, it's going to be to funnel that at Saturn.
In these communities, I was blown away by the disparities between Missouri and Manhattan or Detroit and San Francisco.
What's interesting is that because Saturn in Cancer can also point to those who dry up the boundaries, right, Saturn, outside of the zones that they're protecting in a way that resists further connection. So you get these isolated cells, right? And who does this? This is, well, groups that are polarized are often trying to protect something they perceive as vulnerable, but their boundaries are ridiculously strong to the point where it makes no sense. So throughout life, he's always going to be seeing this manifestation of Saturn in Cancer. So his Capricorn response is very structural.
Well, one, I learned that at that point I was not strong enough to build a successful business. And so that's one reason why I ended up working for another startup, a company that was led by someone I admired, because I thought, okay, if I'm not strong enough to do this now, then I should find someone who's stronger than me and then try and learn from him.
So he says, okay, what are the structures that are making you fearful and isolated over there? Both of you. He sees the isolated hate groups and he sees the mothers without access to resources. With all of the state policy that has been introduced around weed, no one has addressed the criminal justice issue. And yet Andrew Yang, immediately that's a part of his platform.
And I'm for full legalization, remove it from the federally controlled substance list. And I would go a step further and pardon everyone who's in jail for a low-level nonviolent drug offense, because it makes no sense to me to have people behind bars for things that are legal in parts of the country. So my plan as president is on April 20th of 2021, I'm going to mass pardon everyone who's in jail for a nonviolent drug-related offense. I'm going to high-five them on the way out, and I'm going to be a very popular man that day.
Like, that's crucial, and he doesn't miss it because it's a vulnerable population who's behind a wall, and that's what he's going to see over and over again. Okay, so more specifically, what does he have in Capricorn? What does he have in Aquarius? Let's actually start with his moon. The moon often talks about how you seek comfort, how you offer comfort. So it's about how you were nurtured when you were young. So often Aquarius moons grow up feeling somehow outside of the norm. There's an outsiderness.
My brother and I tried to fit in, really, and failed a lot of the time, I would say. I went to Chinese school on weekends. I was a very nerdy Chinese kid, played piano and had braces. I was one of the only Asian kids in my town.
So an outside looking in perspective can be really good for objectivity. If it's used to existing outside of comfort zones, then by nature it becomes a moon that's actually comfortable being uncomfortable.
And my wife now, finds this sometimes very annoying. But I have low regard for creature comforts. Like, I really just don't care.
Right.
Like, I'm perfectly happy with janky street food.
We tried to offer you a lot of stuff in the green room. You wanted water.
This man can't be bought.
Yeah.
So he has a big emphasis on his second house. The moon and Venus in the second house are both very good for resources. The moon makes them material, Venus attracts them, and having Mercury there really enlivens your mind around it. So it gives you an interest in the minutia.
So I remember this number. I took the SAT when I was 12 and got a 1220 on the old scale.
Oh, geez. All right.
And then everyone in my public school found out that score, and then it was like I was like an alien. And I was like literally 12 years old, so I had no idea why anyone cared.
So the moon is in a sign ruled by Saturn, but Saturn is in a sign ruled by the moon. That's a condition called mutual reception. So that does a lot in this chart, allowing the moon to assist Saturn and Saturn to assist the moon. So it helps them to attain a positive outcome, even if the process itself is still very uncomfortable. And it also means that when he sees those Saturn-imposed scarcities, he's going to go to solutions that involve the moon. So those are solutions that involve resources. And there are some other planets there in the second house with the moon. Like, let's look at Venus. Venus, who rules the part of the chart that tells us about his children, the fifth, is also teamed up with Mercury. So she's pretty caught up in convincing us to let him change the world for better from this very globally minded, outside looking in sign of Aquarius. A Mercury-Venus conjunction is very good for getting your message across. It tends to help Mercury communicate in a way that is connective to people. And it helps Venus understand and analyze the relationship stuff that she's on about. Okay, all these Saturn archetypes and the relationship to the seventh and the focus on the second house resources. What else jumps out is the moon's closest aspect. So it's in this frictive kind of combative relationship with Uranus. And Uranus is like innovative, authenticity-driven, inspirational, very tech-savvy, lightning, electricity, freedom above all else kind of planet. Uranus is squaring the moon. So it's not easy for any moon to receive a square from Uranus. The moon wants stability, and yet Uranus is the opposite of that. So that's absolutely friction. An Aquarius moon is already foregoing some personal warmth for the formation of ideas. So Uranus wouldn't be nearly as important if it were just squaring his moon, if it weren't also conjoining this point called the MC. So the MC is the spotlight in astrology. It's where the zenith of the sky was. And it's a point that we associate with career, or how you're known, or how you show up on the stage of life, or what we call you. So we see this and we say, okay, this guy, he's got Uranus on the MC. He would not be comfortable being a corporate pawn.
And even if you look at my own experience, so, I was good at school and went to law school, and then was plugged into Davis Polk and Wardwell, this high-end corporate law firm, and became the embodiment of a transaction cost, where they were going to pay me 6 figures to work on deal documents for some giant acquisition, and that was my highest use. Like, I thought to myself, this is a quote from the time, I said, this law firm's like a temple to the squandering of human potential. Because you had some of the top educational products in our society doing scut work, essentially. And so if you can imagine me going through that experience, and then spending 6 years training the analysts at McKinsey and Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Morgan Stanley, and seeing another version of the same thing. And the financial crisis actually had me start Venture for America in response, because I saw that literally my friends were creating financial instruments that had tanked the economy.
If Venture for America, which he thought was addressing a substantive problem in a way that would matter, he realizes that that is not actually solving the problem, there's no way that Uranus is going to just say, whatever, I'm doing what I can, right? So because we're talking about the moon and Uranus, we can say that he is emotionally invested in solving the problems that he sees.
So then I go home, I'm steeped in this knowledge, this certainty, this dread. And keep in mind, I'm one of the most celebrated social entrepreneurs of this generation. I get medals, awards, accolades, like for being the guy who created thousands of jobs around the country. And I am 100% certain that my work, as proud as I am of it, was pouring water into a bathtub that has this giant hole ripped in the bottom. And no one's gonna do a damn thing about the giant hole.
Why you?
I'm running for president because I'm focused on solving the problem that got Donald Trump elected in the first place in 2016. He's our president because we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, all the swing states that he needed to win. And my friends in technology know we're about to do the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, truck driving jobs, and on and on.
Scorpio is all about tunneling to the bottom of things. So there's a real uncomfortability with any solutions that don't go all the way to the bottom.
I ran a nonprofit for 7 years, and people were congratulating me, and I was like, you don't get it. I'm just like scratching the surface of like the problem I'm trying to tackle. You know, that's so to me, we have to do so much more. I would never suggest that $1,000 a month is going to do the work for us.
Things that look good enough, not if they can't be implemented in a practical Capricorn kind of way.
You know, I like to consider myself very fact and data driven. And so if a solution was tried in a host of other countries that I think of as pretty smart countries like Denmark and Sweden and France and Germany, and then they ended up saying like, this is actually so bad that we're going to repeal it. Like I take that set of experiences is very compelling. You know, if you can't learn from other people's mistakes, then you know, you're kind of putting yourself in a tough spot.
It's the moon in his chart that gives me the sense of sincerity. If his moon were in a different place, we wouldn't see the same level of commitment to actually like saving the whole ship or the whiz kid brilliance quite so much. He just wouldn't be as compelled.
We have to focus on fixing the system that is distorting and dehumanizing various people, turning them into economic actors very, very often. That you all have this almost sacred trust to try and safeguard the rest of the country from this broken down system that is on the verge of pushing us off this precipice, but after which there will be no coming back. And you can all feel it. Like we're all heading in that direction. That's why I'm running for president. I'm not running for president because I fantasized about ever being president. I'm running for president because I'm an American and I'm a parent, and I can see the country we will leave to our children, and it is not something that I'm willing to accept.
Okay, so we've talked about his sun, we've talked about his moon, we've talked about Saturn in Cancer in the house of the other. Let's talk about Jupiter. Jupiter is in Pisces, which is a sign it rules, and it's in its own terms. It's in the face of Jupiter. It also happens to be conjoining a fixed star that has the nature of Jupiter. So this is just like Jupiter, Jupiter, Jupiter all the way down. So Jupiter in the third house, it not only supports his relationships, his career, and his networks, But it also shows that whatever Yang's routine is, he's actually really likely to enjoy it. So there's an ease, there's a magic with it, there's a take it for granted. If we build it, they will come kind of faith thing, which is a really nice touch for his Saturn, actually. So this adds this emotional expansiveness and this positivity to what happens with Saturn. His inner gears start to incorporate a real belief in how you can bring abundance into the structure.
We need to instill a mindset of abundance in this country in order to solve the big problems. And right now it's slipping away. Scarcity is winning in this country by the numbers.
So Jupiter trine Saturn also tells us about his ability to really learn from real world limits. So real world limits are Saturn. And Pisces is an adaptable sign. And so when he comes up against limits, he adapts in the most productive, like least defeatist way that he can.
So then I went home and was like, okay, like what is the plan? What are we going to do? And I have 2 young kids who are 6 and 3. And so literally, like I'm looking at them being like, am I really just gonna raise them in this country that's gonna disintegrate around them and just like start trying to sock money away so that we can like have a bunker like some of my richer friends? Like, is that really the plan? And that struck me as deeply pathetic as a plan. And so I said, okay, what is the actual plan? Like, what am I going to do? And then I thought, well, in order to make it so that the people that Polly is worried about, like that the people will do better, you have to actually redesign our economy. You have to like change the rules so that we don't value ourselves solely as economic inputs, but we value ourselves intrinsically. Like maybe we're worth something even if our truck starts driving itself. Or the AI is better than us at reading the radiology film. Or, you know, my mall closes and like I'm a 39-year-old woman who works in the mall. So we have to start looking at valuing ourselves at some other mechanism than the marketplace, because the marketplace is about to turn on us in epic, catastrophic fashion. And so I was like, okay, how do you make that happen? And so then I looked and said, well, the only way to rewrite the rules of the economy is to get control of the government. And I said, okay, how do you get control of the government? You run for president and win. And then I said, okay, what are the rules for running for president? Only 2 rules, it turns out. 35 or older, and natural born citizen. So I was like, check and check. And then I was like, and then check number 3 is I went to my wife and was like, hey baby, I think I'm gonna run for president. And then she was like, that's nice, like, you know, pass the sauce. So that's how I came to run for president, on a platform of universal basic income, which is that we have to start putting $1,000 a month in the hands of American adults as soon as possible.
So when you look at just his Saturn-ruled placements, you see this Mercury, Moon, Venus, you see the Sun in the first, you start to get an idea of this person as very strategy, systems-oriented. But with this Jupiter, you're saying that, okay, he's still a strategist, but he's willing to consider strategies that require a leap of faith.
Yeah!
So after we make that threshold with your help, we're going to be on the debate stage not just June, July, but then September and October.
That's right.
And I'm going to give you guys a bit of the inside scoop. After we hit those thresholds, then we're going to start getting aggressive. One reason why he's leading in the polls, and that's one reason you'll see me leading in the polls before too long.
You think you can beat Joe Biden?
I think I'll be the nominee.
I mean, even if you look at his sun as his identity, and his sun is in charge of Leo, so Leo for him is shared resources, where he would go ask other people for money. So even that feeds back to Saturn. So he's going to ask other people for money if it's for a venture that feeds back at the protection of the source. He knows he's had success asking for funds before. He already knows he's successful at it, and his strategy takes this knowledge or faith into account. And I don't think he's wrong about that. There's a sense with his Venus that you're giving to this Aquarian greater good, so that's working out. And even directing things to loosen the polarization of those groups who are already in a scarcity mindset, fear-based tribalism.
Where if you have a scarcity of money or time or companionship or food, it has the net effect of lowering your rationality and IQ by 13 points, or 1 standard deviation. So if you have the sneaking feeling that many of our fellow citizens are getting less reasonable and rational, we probably are, because if you introduce pervasive financial insecurity into a population, that's what the studies show, would happen. And so it's related to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but it's also the scarcity research. And so it's amazing what just taking the financial insecurity off of someone's mind will do for their outlook.
Okay, so we have the world that he's envisioning, Aquarius, willing to make happen through laws, structural initiatives, that Saturn stuff, where there's respect for tradition, Capricorn, Cancer, but this prioritization for newer, innovative measurements, if they're going to solve things, Uranus, where how the vulnerable are doing, that Cancer stuff he's always looking at, is a priority. We really need to look at the 12th house now because there's so much happening there. The 12th house is going to be stuff that Yang himself might not be as aware of. We haven't talked about Mars. Mars has some power in his chart. It's in charge of where his MC Uranus is. So it does really imbue that with that Sagittarius Jupiter action. So I love that his Mars is motivated by the quest. You're not going to see outbursts with this president. He has a very cool moon and a hidden Mars. So he's going to experience and let that stuff out in his own private spaces. And it's not a public phenomenon. Whereas like Trump, for example, has Mars right on his ascendant, conjunct the fixed star Algol, which is just all the time. We are not going to get that with Andrew Yang. So you can just be reassured about his Mars. He actually is the opposite of Donald Trump in that way. Looking at the North Node and Neptune, you're going to amplify the visionary stuff to the extreme. It's very manifesty. Like the North Node likes to make things real. It's hungry for more and more matter. And Neptune is really boundaryless and porous and all-consuming, but also is just like an amazing access to the imaginal realm. Neptune is often where we need boundaries, and to have that be in your most subliminal, dreamy places, like that's beautiful. Now, because it's in that 90-degree relationship or square with Jupiter, who rules Sagittarius, where it's sitting, and Jupiter's doing so well, I would say that this square with Jupiter really just makes his dreaming and his envisioning have a check on it. So Jupiter is also very expansive, but Jupiter wants things to be workable. He wants to take all those parts and say, okay, enough with all that imagining. It's time to actually take these steps and to see the failures as meaningful markers on the journey and continue from there. So Jupiter wants it to be a story, wants it to be a quest. So the most common way to look at fixed stars is just to associate them with the points on the ecliptic that they happen to be closest to. There are more complicated ways to use them. I'm not going to get into that here, but the other ways are interesting too for his chart. But the most obvious two stars we're going to talk about, though, are Sirius and Antares. The north node of the moon and Neptune both conjoin the fixed star Antares, and it's a fighting star. So we do get to see that a lot in the charts of fighters that Austin likes to show us. So from his teachings, it's definitely about forcing a contest, so achieving eminence through competition or struggle. And it definitely boosts your martial qualities. So this is in his dream space, in his vision, and in his ambition. Having all that Sag stuff there, he probably has a really active imagination.
When I was growing up, a dorky kid in Westchester, playing Dungeons & Dragons, I didn't dream about being the scribe. I dreamt about going in the woods and killing something. And so my parents looked at me like they didn't understand what I was saying, which was probably the case. I then went back to work, and I gave notice. I said, hey, this job's not for me. I'm going to leave before I get any better.
So he sees the battles. He sees things as a battle, as a contest. He's willing to do something like run for president, which is a very public contest for eminence. With Jupiter there, he says, okay, enough of this just imagining it. We're going to do it, and we're going to win.
And we all know from day one that this is going to be a high variance campaign. We're playing to win, am I right? That's right!
And his subconscious, attraction to it is Antares, because he is thirsty for that bigger and bigger contest.
Round one, fight.
So at this point, because of precession, Sirius is located at 14 degrees of Cancer. So Sirius, also known as the bite of the dog, is absolutely one of the brightest, if not the brightest star in the sky. And Sirius has the nature of both Jupiter and Mars, but the main thing is that it's fierce, it's influential, it gives this sense of fatedness and deep melancholy if eminence is not achieved. And it makes what it touches not only bigger and bigger, but associated with this kind of desire for legacy. So it is actually one of the stars of eminence. Like Princess Diana had it conjoining her sun. And it's interesting, though, with this chart that it is tied to Saturn. Saturn does not make this tied to his self-interest quite as much. He sees himself as an actor in the purposes of Sirius, but he's not the reasons. So there's a lot of comments from people who want Yang to be more aggressive, right? So when he fights back, he's not going to do it from a place of personal frustration or aggression, but it's about the authority that he feels to garner resources for the struggling masses. That's where his already very responsible Saturn gets this internal sense of fated obligation and this desire to funnel resources at it. It also informs his life or death, make it or break it kind of the time is now rhetoric that he has with running for president. But it means that he's not a pushover and that he feels that desperate, fated sense of purpose. So this is someone who would not cave at a negotiating table. You don't cave if you have a Sirius conjoining your Saturn, governing your entire sense of what you're responsible to and what you're accountable to. One of the questions that I wanted to answer going into this is, why is Andrew Yang so addictive? I mean, this is not just me. Like, I have other things to do, but I was interested enough in him to take the time to do this, and I don't get paid to make podcasts or videos, right? So this is kind of a long answer, but bear with me. Jupiter moves faster than Neptune. Every 13 years, Neptune has moved about a sign when Jupiter gets back to it. So every 13 years, we have a whole Jupiter-Neptune cycle, and then it starts again. And this defines really cultural trends and ideological things that are floating around and is totally related to why Andrew Yang is so addictive. So right now in the sky, Jupiter is at the last closing square with Neptune. In his chart, he has that Jupiter-Neptune square that we talked about, his Neptune all amplified by Antares and the North Node. And it's the exact inverse of the Jupiter-Neptune square in the sky. So where his Neptune is in Sagittarius, the Neptune in the sky is now in Pisces. And those two signs are Jupiter ruled. You have these Yang Gang supporters, and they are like so enthusiastic about the vision that he is offering.
PowerPoint! PowerPoint! Yes! PowerPoint! PowerPoint! Yes, this is the nerdiest presidential campaign in history! We did it, Seattle! We weren't quite there until that moment, but then you just did it.
Something in there about the fact that he has a lot of long form interviews. I don't know exactly what the wording would be to get that point across, but I mean, that's how we all got into the Yang Gang, is because we went from interview to interview to interview because we were addicted to these long form interviews and everything that he was saying and all the truth that he was dropping.
But the point of this is that there's definitely some serious chart drugs that are happening between Andrew Yang's narrative and what he's offering the cultural conversation and people's own Jupiter-Neptune crises. So really, I think supporters that he gained while the Jupiter-Neptune square was like at its height of tension might be the most passionate supporters. Jupiter leaves Sagittarius in December, and then we have this crazy eclipse. And then in January, we have the Pluto-Saturn conjunction. Now Pluto, and I don't care whether it's a planet or not, it has the job of defining the edge of the sun's gravitational reality. So beyond the boundary of Pluto is the void and the nothingness and the unfathomable darkness. And when we talk about Pluto, we are therefore talking about that extreme edge. And so there's these clinging on points around fear and control. The experience of having Pluto in the sky kind of activate points that are sensitive to you in your birth chart, and that's a Pluto transit. It's quite a thing. It's quite a thing. So Andrew Yang has already undergone a Pluto transit to his ascendant, and it wasn't really that long ago in the scheme of things. Pluto was transiting his ascendant from when he was working to get that Manhattan test prep company acquired right until the month that he resigned as CEO. And so this was when the formation of the idea of what was wrong with the country and what could he do about it started to form. So it transformed him from whoever he was as the CEO of Manhattan Prep and sent him out as someone who was definitely more clear on his own sense of power and dynamics and also of what was happening on a wider power level than before.
Well, one of the things I try and tell people is like these tests don't measure really anything that's significant.
Yeah.
and this is coming from a guy who ran a test prep company that became
Is that really what you realized there?
Yeah, I did. It measures a very narrow set of intellectual traits. And one of the major problems we have is that we're dehumanizing many of our young people through teaching to the test and having this hierarchical arrangement where the hierarchy, in my mind, obscures many other human and intellectual capacities.
So everyone goes through a Pluto square. So that's when Pluto forms that harsh Mars-like 90-degree aspect to where Pluto was when you were born. And Andrew Yang went through his Pluto square shortly after his Pluto to Ascendant transit. So that was his resignation from Manhattan Prep to the completion of his first book, Smart People Should Build Things. And that was in early 2014. So his analysis that came out of that Pluto transiting his ascendant kind of culminated in that Pluto square, and he released a book and started a company, and before you know it, he is meeting President Obama. Pluto has been transiting his sun and will continue to transit his sun until the conjunction of Saturn and Pluto that happened at 22 degrees on his sun in January. So Yang's birthday in January of 2020 is actually a really big deal for all of us. The fact that Pluto is transiting his sun right now, it's not going to bring him down. It's only going to be a source of compulsion and effort. It's not strange for him to be wrestling with and addressing the issues that a Saturn, I mean, he is Saturn, and Pluto, he's had so much Pluto, combination would mean. In Yang's chart, Pluto is in Libra, and it's having the most direct conversation of anything with Venus in Aquarius. And Venus rules Libra, where Pluto is, so this is a really functional conversation. I might have mentioned before that the way that Venus and Mercury are together, it really lets Yang communicate in a way that is pretty palatable. It's easy to listen to. People are like attracted to his communication style. That trine to Pluto means that he can articulate things that are Pluto-like that dark dystopic idea that he has of what's coming, and make it really palatable. So it adds also, Pluto has this kind of obsessive thing with it. Either you'll find it in yourself or you'll find it in the people around you when you're going through a deep Pluto thing. So Venus in his chart is really concerned with the projects around redefining value in that constructive way for people. So it adds this layer of obsession to that project, right? That is a loop. That is a tight loop. It would be hard for him to even break as a habit. Like that is a normal work pattern for him. So the fact that his project right now is running for president, this Pluto transit gives him so much obsessive focus. Like he is not, I don't think any of the other candidates can rival the level of obsessive focus that he's putting on this campaign. Like you think, okay, you're running for president, you're probably going to have some obsessive focus. I can't think of a way to articulate that in a chart that would look better than this. And in timing, this year we have to watch what Mercury's up to. In his solar return chart for 2019, Mercury is conjoining Saturn in the first house. Next year, it's going to be Venus, and it's a 10th house perfection year. So next year, it's even more about carrying on this Pluto. So I really love that he's activating the generation of people born with Pluto in Libra. This is everyone born roughly between October of 1971 up until sometime in 1984. So think about Libra, and you have the scales, and Pluto being that place where power and fear and control and the edge and the unknowns and like having that obsessive grip on things. One of the edge lords, you know. Pluto in Libra can see everyone's grasps on power and doesn't center themselves in it so much. And you have to realize that these are the kids that really straddled the technology explosion. They've also lived through times of official peace, right? And seen wars end, even, but also seen totally unjust wars launched. With Pluto there, who's the ultimate, like, lord of the underworld. So that's the most extreme kinds of power plays that are out there. You can even see those things as, oh, I could work that for a win-win, you know? So I love the Pluto in Libra generation, and I think we need one. I do. So they're not going to be against entire generational issues. They're definitely concerned with power, but it tips towards this diplomacy, this rebalance of power. So I love that has all these uniting signifiers. Obviously, I'm enamored of Pluto and Libra because I have one.
But the way I can get this done is that it's not left or right, it's forward. And that as president, I'm just going to be completely non-ideological and solutions-oriented. And after I win, people will be very, very drawn to that approach. I can get a lot of good things done for the American people.
I just want to make a point, too. We need to remember that all of the other candidates, if you're looking at a political race, everyone is going to have some elevated chart significations. Pluto coming up out of the shadows is very powerful in this moment, as far as him having a little bit of an edge that might not be obvious. I do want to throw his zodiacal releasing up there. This is a pretty mind-blowing technique for people with public careers. I'm not going to get all the way into it, but I'll put a link below for more resources. Suffice to say, Andrew Yang is in a lifetime peak for his career activity right now. This happens only once or twice in our whole lives. This one is a clean and positive indication of a leap to the highest office that he has ever attained. And I mean, having this much exposure and running for president could totally be it. Again, I want to emphasize that everyone's charts are lit up in some way or another. So this is by no means proof of him winning the Democratic nomination or rising past that level, but it does put some extra magic into his ability to gain positive exposure. So it really lines things up so that people are there to hear your message. So like people who are lining up behind him, this guy is not a dud. Like he's on fire. I'm not going to say any more about this. We could look into secondary progressions. We could talk more about past career peaks and what they meant in his biography and all sorts of things. I hope I've given you a little bit more of an idea of what astrologers look at when they look at a chart. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Know that I'm super into doing readings, and you can find out more about that on my website, which I will link to below. Thanks for watching.